Have you ever noticed that the moment you stop chasing, stop calling, stop trying to prove your worth, suddenly the very same person who took you for granted starts wondering where you've gone? It feels almost like magic, doesn't it? But it's not magic. It's psychology, self-respect, and the invisible energy you give off when you finally decide, I am enough. Pulling away isn't manipulation. It's reclaiming your center. Most people misunderstand this idea because society has taught us to associate distance with games, punishment, or emotional control. We are conditioned to believe that if someone withdraws, it must be to provoke a reaction, to test the other person, or to make them chase. But in reality, when you choose to step back from a relationship, a dynamic, or even a situation that drains you, it is not about forcing someone else's hand. It is about finding your own balance again. Think of it like standing in front of a mirror after a long time and realizing that you no longer recognize yourself because you've been bending, stretching, and molding into shapes just to keep someone else comfortable. Pulling away is the first step to undoing that distortion. It is not about manipulation. It is about liberation. Reclaiming your center means pulling all the scattered parts of yourself back home. It's about noticing how often you've abandoned your own needs, your peace, your desires just to maintain someone else's approval. Sometimes we don't realize how far we drift away from ourselves until we hit a moment of exhaustion. Maybe you've been over-texting, over-giving, over-explaining, and each time you do, a small piece of you feels ignored by you. This is where the misalignment begins. You are no longer living in your center, you are orbiting around someone else. Pulling away is simply you stopping that orbit and deciding to stand still again, in your own space, with your own power intact. There is an important psychological distinction between manipulation and self-preservation. Manipulation seeks to control the other person's reaction, while self-preservation is about protecting your energy regardless of how the other person responds. When you pull away to reclaim your center, you are not sitting there watching your phone to see if they will text. You are not counting the days until they come back, and you are not planning a dramatic comeback to prove a point. Instead, you are redirecting that energy towards yourself. You are filling your time with self-reflection, self-care, and self-growth. You are remembering the hobbies, the passions, and the dreams you neglected while you were pouring all your focus into someone else. That act alone removes the weight of dependency. You are no longer fueled by their attention, but by your own alignment. The moment you decide to pull away, something subtle but powerful happens. Your nervous system begins to calm down. Instead of constantly being in a state of anticipation, waiting for their response, their approval, or their affection, you allow yourself to rest. This is what reclaiming your center feels like. Safety within yourself, no longer tied to the unpredictability of someone else's moods or decisions. And ironically, when you stop gripping so tightly, people often notice a shift. They sense that you are no longer operating from neediness, and that shift can either attract them back or reveal who was only there when you were giving endlessly. Either way, you win because you gain truth and clarity. Reclaiming your center also builds a foundation of self-respect. It sends a quiet but strong message. I am not here to be drained. I am not here to lose myself in order to keep someone else comfortable. I am here to honor my own worth. This message is not spoken out loud. It's carried in your energy, in the way you hold yourself, in the choices you make after pulling away. And once you live from this center, you start seeing how differently people respond to you. Some rise to match that energy, treating you with more respect and awareness, while others fall away because they can no longer feed off your overextension. Both outcomes serve you. because they strip away illusion and leave behind only what is real and aligned with your growth. Scarcity increases value. Constant availability decreases it. This principle is not just a psychological trick or something that only applies to economics. It is woven deeply into human behavior, relationships, and the way we perceive worth. When something feels rare, difficult to access, or limited in supply, the human mind instinctively assigns it greater significance. This is why diamonds, despite being just stones formed under pressure, hold so much power in society. They are marketed as rare, precious, and therefore people are willing to pay enormous amounts for them. Now, compare this with air. The very thing that keeps us alive, abundantly available, always around us, taken in every second without a thought. Because it is constant and always there, it is rarely valued until it becomes scarce, like when you are gasping for breath after running or held underwater. The moment availability is threatened, the mind wakes up to its value. In relationships, the exact same mechanism plays out. When you make yourself constantly available, always picking up the phone on the first ring, always canceling your own plans to accommodate theirs, always texting back instantly, always being emotionally accessible no matter what, your presence begins to blend into the background. The other person stops noticing the effort, stops appreciating the consistency, and unconsciously takes it for granted. It's not that they are malicious, it's that the human brain adapts to consistency. It normalizes what is always available. When something becomes the norm, it loses the shine, it loses the urgency, and it no longer feels as special. The problem is, when you equate constant giving with love, you start stripping your own presence of the very value you're trying to create. Scarcity, on the other hand, ignites the psychology of desire. When your time, energy, and presence are not endlessly accessible, it creates a sense of curiosity and even urgency in the other person. They begin to wonder where you are, why you are not always available, what you are doing that doesn't involve them. This is not about playing games or making yourself artificially scarce. It is about living in a way that prioritizes your own life, your own passions, and your own balance. When you naturally focus on yourself, your growth, your hobbies, your friendships, and your responsibilities, your availability shrinks in a healthy way. You are no longer at someone's beck and call, which makes every moment you do share with them carry more weight. Your presence becomes a gift, not a given. The mind is wired to notice contrast. If someone hears silence after being used to constant conversation, they notice the silence more than the words they once overlooked. If someone sees you focused on your own goals instead of endlessly pouring into theirs, they feel the absence of that energy more strongly than they ever felt its presence. This is the paradox of human connection. We notice and appreciate most what is not endlessly accessible. This doesn't mean you should withhold love or affection. It means you should give with intention, not obligation, and create space where your presence is genuinely felt. Constant availability also creates an unhealthy dynamic where one person becomes the anchor of attention and the other becomes the taker. Over time, this imbalance breeds resentment in you and complacency in them. You begin to feel drained because you're always giving without being seen, and they begin to expect it as though it is the natural order of things. When you shift into a space of scarcity, again, not as a tactic, but as a byproduct of respecting your own time, you disrupt that cycle. Suddenly, what was expected is no longer guaranteed, and what was overlooked becomes something they long for. This shift is not about punishing anyone. It is about restoring balance to the value exchange. In every aspect of life, the most valued things are the ones we cannot take for granted. Experiences that are rare, relationships that are nurtured with care, time that is given intentionally rather than automatically. All of these hold more power because they are not limitless. When you understand this principle and live by it, you stop feeling guilty for not being available 24/7. You realize that your time, your love, your attention are not just infinite resources to be spent carelessly. They are treasures that deserve to be invested where they will be truly appreciated and respected. Absence often speaks louder than presence. This is one of those truths that most people only recognize when they finally step back from a dynamic they've been overinvested in. Presence is comfortable, it is expected, it is there every day. It can be warm, familiar, and easy to take for granted. Absence, however, creates a vacuum, a space where all the noise and constant interaction is suddenly missing, and that silence begins to echo in the mind of the other person far more than your words or actions ever did when you were present. The human psyche is wired to notice what is missing more intensely than what is consistently there. Think of it like background music. You only notice it when it suddenly stops, and that pause feels almost louder than the sound itself. When you are always present, always available, always accessible, your energy can become background noise. It becomes a constant that people unconsciously adjust to. They assume you will always be there, always ready, always giving, always listening. But when you pull back, when you stop being the person who fills every silence, answers every call, and solves every problem, the absence of that energy is felt in ways that your presence never could achieve. People start to notice the void. They notice the missing text, the missing voice, the missing reassurance. The human mind is more sensitive to loss than to gain. We register what we no longer have with a stronger emotional impact than what we've had all along. That is why absence shakes people awake. It confronts them with the reality of what they've been taking for granted. Absence also triggers reflection. While presence can allow someone to remain complacent, absence forces them to question. Where did that energy go? Why don't I feel their presence anymore? Was I giving enough in return? These questions often don't surface when you are consistently available because there is no need for them. Your energy keeps filling the space. But when you withdraw, the silence becomes a mirror. It makes the other person reflect on their own behavior, their own role, their own contributions. In this way, absence becomes not only a louder message, but also a teacher, compelling others to confront truths they could easily ignore when you were always present. On a deeper level, absence creates contrast. Presence without absence loses its impact because there is no change, no dynamic shift to make it stand out. Imagine sunlight without night. If the sun never set, we would stop appreciating its warmth and brightness. It is the darkness that makes the light valuable. It is the stillness that makes movement meaningful. It is absence that makes presence powerful. Relationships work the same way. If you never allow your absence to be felt, your presence loses its weight. When you finally step back, you restore that balance, reminding others that your presence is not a given, but a privilege. This principle does not mean cutting people off cold or creating artificial distance as a strategy. It means learning to recognize when your presence has been undervalued and allowing absence to do the speaking for you. Words often fail where absence succeeds. You can tell someone you're tired, drained, or unappreciated, but the actual act of stepping back delivers that message in a way no sentence can. Silence becomes your language. Distance becomes your boundary, and absence becomes your reminder that you will not keep giving where there is no recognition. In many cases, absence also reveals the truth of connection. When you step away, you get to see who notices, who reaches out, who cares enough to close the gap, and who doesn't. Presence can hide these truths because you're the one keeping the connection alive, but absence strips away the illusions. It shows you who values you and who only enjoyed the convenience of your presence. This clarity can be painful, but it is also liberating because it prevents you from investing further into spaces where your presence is not respected. Pulling back is more about self-respect than about the other person. This is where most people misunderstand the entire concept of distance. They assume that when you step back from someone, you are trying to send a message, create a reaction, or punish them for not meeting your expectations. But the deeper truth is that genuine pulling back is not about them at all. It is about you reclaiming your dignity, your boundaries, and your energy that has been scattered in places where it is not appreciated. It is an inward decision, a declaration that you will no longer betray yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. Self-respect is the foundation of healthy connections, and when it has been compromised, pulling back becomes an act of survival, not strategy. When you pull back for self-respect, you are not obsessing over whether they will chase you, miss you, or return. You are not waiting to see how your absence will shift their behavior. Instead, you are finally shifting the focus inward, asking yourself the questions you've been avoiding. Why am I overextending myself? Why am I tolerating less than I deserve? Why am I pouring into a space that leaves me empty? This inner shift is the real meaning of pulling back. It is you choosing yourself, even if that choice means losing the illusion of closeness with someone else. The power lies not in their reaction, but in your decision to stop betraying your own worth. Self-respect has a unique energy. It changes the way you walk, talk, and even the way you show up in relationships. When you pull back with self-respect, you're no longer operating from fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of being replaced, fear of not being enough. You move from a place of confidence that says, if this connection does not honor me, I will honor myself enough to step back. This energy is magnetic. It commands respect because you first give it to yourself. The irony is that people often start valuing you more when you finally value yourself enough to pull away. But the true victory is that their recognition no longer defines your worth. Pulling back also resets the dynamic. In many relationships, a pattern forms where one person keeps giving and the other keeps taking. This imbalance slowly erodes the giver's self-esteem and creates dependency in the receiver. By pulling back, you break this cycle. You are no longer the one carrying the emotional weight, no longer the one fixing, chasing, or smoothing over everything. You reclaim your time and space, and in doing so, you force the dynamic to either recalibrate or dissolve. Both outcomes are rooted in self-respect. If they step up and meet you halfway, the relationship becomes healthier. If they don't, you walk away with your dignity intact. The act of pulling back also builds resilience. It teaches you that you don't need constant reassurance, validation, or presence from someone else to feel whole. When you spend time with yourself after pulling back, you begin to reconnect with the parts of you that were neglected while you were focused on them. You remember your passions, your goals, your friendships, your inner peace. This process strengthens your sense of self and makes you less likely to fall into unhealthy patterns again. It's not about closing your heart, but about strengthening it so that it can love without losing itself. At its core, pulling back is a mirror of your standards. It silently communicates what you will and will not accept without the need for confrontation or explanation. Words can be dismissed, argued with, or ignored, but actions rooted in self-respect speak louder than anything you could ever say. By pulling back, you are choosing to act in alignment with your worth rather than continuing to plead for recognition. It is a quiet but undeniable declaration. I respect myself enough to step away from anything that disrespects me. Fear of losing someone is replaced by the realization you were losing yourself. This is one of the deepest awakenings a person can experience in relationships, because so much of our attachment is built on the fear of absence. We cling to people, sometimes desperately, because the thought of them walking away feels unbearable. We imagine the silence, the void, the loneliness, and it terrifies us into holding on even when the bond is breaking us down. We sacrifice our own needs, compromise our boundaries, and silence our inner voice, all because we believe losing them would mean losing love, losing stability, or losing our identity. But what we often fail to see until later is that the real loss has been happening quietly all along. Not the loss of them, but the loss of ourselves. Every time you abandon your own values to keep someone, every time you silence your own pain to avoid conflict, every time you shrink yourself just to fit into their expectations, a piece of you slips away. And by the time you realize it, you are more afraid of who you've become than of losing them. The fear of losing someone often disguises itself as love. You tell yourself you're staying because you care, because you're committed, because you can't imagine life without them. But beneath that devotion is a subtle desperation that whispers, "Without them, I won't be enough." This fear chains you to behaviors that betray your own worth. You tolerate neglect, indifference, or even mistreatment because the terror of emptiness seems worse than the pain of staying. Yet with time, the exhaustion of living half alive begins to outweigh the fear of separation. You wake up to the realization that while you've been guarding against the loss of another person, you've been bleeding away your own essence, your self-respect, your joy, and this is when the fear transforms into clarity. That clarity is often painful at first because it forces you to admit that the real cost of clinging has been your own identity. You see how much of yourself you've handed over in the name of keeping peace. You recognize how often you've said yes when you wanted to say no, how often you've stayed quiet when your soul wanted to speak, how often you've ignored the ache in your heart just to avoid rocking the boat. This realization can feel like a shock because you start to understand that the person you were so afraid of losing has already taken more of you than you could afford to give. The fear shifts. It is no longer about losing them. It becomes about losing what little remains of you if you continue down that path. In that shift lies power. Suddenly, what once terrified you, the thought of their absence, begins to feel like relief compared to the suffocation of self-betrayal. You no longer measure your worth by their presence. You begin to measure it by the parts of yourself you are reclaiming. Every step you take back toward your own center feels like oxygen filling your lungs after years of shallow breathing. You begin to see that letting go of someone does not mean losing love. It means creating space for a healthier form of it, starting with the love you give yourself. The fear that once dictated your choices gives way to the realization that you have been the one abandoning yourself and that the only way forward is to come home to who you are. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It begins in small ways, choosing silence instead of over-explaining, choosing rest instead of over-giving, choosing honesty instead of suppressing your truth. Each of these choices chips away at the fear and builds the understanding that you are capable of surviving without them, but you cannot survive without yourself. And as this truth settles in, you start to feel lighter. The fear of losing someone fades because you finally recognize that the greater tragedy would be to continue losing yourself piece by piece. People often come back because the psychology of loss is powerful. Human beings are wired to crave what they no longer have, and the absence of something once easily accessible triggers a deep sense of urgency and longing. It is not always about love or genuine care. It is often about the brain's inability to cope with the sudden realization that what was once certain, predictable, and consistently present has disappeared. We tend to undervalue what we assume will always be there, but the moment that assumption is broken, the mind begins to panic. It starts replaying memories, exaggerating the importance of what has been lost, and convincing itself that regaining it is essential. This is why people often circle back when you finally pull away. Not because they suddenly discovered new depths of affection, but because the human psyche experiences loss as a powerful motivator that cuts deeper than steady presence ever could. The psychology of loss is rooted in contrast. While consistency is comforting, it is also easy to take for granted. If someone is always calling, always texting, always showing up, their presence becomes normalized, and the brain does not assign it a special value. But the moment that consistency stops, the silence feels piercing. That contrast creates a mental gap, and the brain is desperate to fill it. People often mistake this discomfort for love or realization, when in truth, it is the mind struggling to adapt to a new reality where the energy they relied on is no longer there. The loss becomes louder than the presence ever was, and in that discomfort, they are pulled back towards you in search of relief. What many fail to realize is that the act of coming back is rarely about the other person suddenly transforming into what you always needed them to be. It is more about the discomfort they feel in your absence. When something they assumed was secure is taken away, they are forced to confront not only their dependency, but also their complacency. They may begin to remember the things they overlooked, the kindness, the attention, the energy you gave so freely. Loss rewrites memory, making ordinary moments seem extraordinary in hindsight. It distorts their perception, amplifying the value of what is gone because the human brain is naturally more sensitive to what it cannot access than to what it already possesses. This is why people return even after they've neglected, ignored, or taken you for granted. The emptiness they feel in your absence becomes a weight they cannot easily ignore. They may not have recognized your worth when you were pouring into them every day, but the removal of that energy creates a sharp void that demands attention. The pull of that void is what drives them back, not necessarily a conscious decision to change or to treat you differently. It is the psychology of loss, an instinctive reaction that makes them chase what they no longer have, even if they once rejected it. For the one who pulled away, this cycle can be both revealing and dangerous. Revealing because it shows how powerful your energy truly was and how much it impacted them, even if they pretended otherwise. Dangerous because the return can trick you into believing that their comeback means transformation, when in reality it may only mean they are uncomfortable with loss. This is where self-awareness becomes crucial. You have to ask, are they back because they value me now, or are they back because the void I left behind unsettled them? That distinction matters because if the return is only about easing their discomfort, the cycle of neglect and absence may repeat again. The psychology of loss is powerful not because it changes people's hearts overnight, but because it exposes the truth of human behavior. We rarely recognize the depth of what we had until it is gone. When you step away, you hold up a mirror that forces them to see how much they relied on your energy. And whether they come back out of love, regret, or discomfort, it is their reaction to your absence that reveals more about the bond than their reaction to your constant presence ever could. The ultimate gain is clarity, self-respect, and freedom from seeking validation. When you finally learn to pull away and reclaim your center, what you discover is not just peace from external chaos, but a deeper alignment within yourself. Clarity comes first, and it is often the hardest because it forces you to see the truth without the filters of attachment, fear, or wishful thinking. Clarity is when you begin to see the relationship for what it is, not what you hoped it would be. You notice patterns you ignored, excuses you accepted, and compromises you made that chipped away at your own happiness. This clarity is not always comforting. It can be sobering, even painful, but it is necessary because it prevents you from living in illusions. Without clarity, you keep investing in dynamics that are draining you. But once your vision sharpens, you recognize who truly values you and who only values your availability. That awareness is the foundation upon which everything else is built. From clarity, self-respect emerges. When you can finally admit to yourself that you are overgiving, overcompensating, or underestimating your own worth, you begin to set boundaries that honor your value. Self-respect is not about arrogance or ego. It is about knowing that your energy, your love, your time are not things to be thrown away recklessly. They are treasures, and they deserve to be received with gratitude, not entitlement. Pulling away is often the first time many people taste self-respect, because it is in the act of withholding your presence that you realize just how much you were offering before. You see yourself not as someone begging to be chosen, but as someone choosing themselves. And once you stand in that truth, you no longer allow yourself to be treated as an option. Self-respect transforms the way you carry yourself, the way you communicate, and the way you navigate relationships. Then comes the freedom from seeking validation, and this is perhaps the most powerful of all. When you are entangled in unhealthy dynamics, much of your energy is spent trying to prove your worth. You find yourself over-explaining, over-accommodating, and over-apologizing in hopes that the other person will finally see you, appreciate you, or choose you. But this constant seeking for validation keeps you in a prison where your worth depends on someone else's acknowledgement. The moment you pull away and return to yourself, that prison door swings open. You realize that your value does not rise or fall based on someone's attention. You stop needing likes, replies, or reassurances to feel enough, because you finally understand that being enough was never conditional. It was always inherent. This freedom is like exhaling after years of holding your breath. You no longer chase recognition because you have recognized yourself. Together, these three gains, clarity, self-respect, and freedom from seeking validation, completely reframe the way you engage with others. With clarity, you see the truth without distortion. With self-respect, you protect your energy and uphold your boundaries. With freedom from validation, you stand firm in your own worth, regardless of how others respond to you. These are not small shifts. They are life-changing transformations. They turn relationships from places of fear and insecurity into spaces of choice and authenticity. Instead of clinging to people out of desperation, you connect with them out of genuine alignment. Instead of overgiving to prove your value, you give because it feels natural and balanced. And instead of panicking at the thought of losing someone, you rest in the confidence that you will never again lose yourself in the process.